to The Truth in This Art. I am your host, Rob Lee, and I am just over the moon. I'm super excited to welcome my next guest. Please welcome Tonya Mosley. Welcome to the podcast.
Rob, thank you so much. I'm excited to be in conversation with you.
It's going to be great. I'm looking forward to this. And I've been looking forward to this since we got it booked. I've been sitting here. It's like, all right, what am I going to research? What's the angle? How are we going to do this? But as I start off, as I have two customs, right, that I like to do when I start. One is a little weird, but it makes sense. Thank you. I'm going to thank you for wearing your glasses. Whenever there's a fellow four-eyed person on, I always thank them for wearing their glasses.
Well, you know, I'm a public radio person, and so we're all supposedly nerds. So, you know, I can wear my glasses with pride.
So you get it. And the second part of the sort of introduction thing, and everyone doesn't get it because everyone doesn't put their glasses on. I want to invite you to, introduce yourself. And one of the reasons I like to do that is I find often we get these online bios, we get these really well thought out and well worded things, but somehow the essence of who the person is missed. It's always a detail. As you do this intro, you may end up mentioning for 5 years of my life, I was a boxer. It's that's not your bio anymore. So I like to have the, person introduce themselves. So if you will, please.
Well, yes, I am Tonya Mosley. And, when people ask me who I am, I think the first thing that always comes to me is that I am a Motown girl. I'm a Detroit girl through and through, even though I really realized recently that I have been away from home longer than I was at home, meaning I left at 18 to go to college, and I lived there for a few years after college, but since then I have been living in lots of other places. But first and foremost, I am a Detroit girl. I am a Mosley through and through, and the Mosleys are Detroiters and Mississippians, and I'm a mother. I am a daughter. And I'm a really good friend, and I'm also a storyteller. And I tell stories through journalism, but I also tell them through fiction writing and traditional podcasting, where I'm doing narratives. And so that is who I am. And I love talking to people, and I love learning new things.
Okay, we're going to get along here. Thank you for that. I see some similar touch points here as I was doing the research, and I was just like, all right, this is going to go well. This is going to go well. So stepping back a little bit, I read that you dreamed of being a journalist from a very young age, from being a teenager, right?
Yeah.
What was it about journalism or storytelling that planted that seed that set you towards that path?
Yeah. I like to be obnoxious and actually clarify that to say, I, from a very, very young age, from the moment I could speak, knew I wanted to tell stories in some way. And when I got to high school, I was already a working journalist. So I was an apprentice for the Detroit Free Press, and I was paid to write stories. And I did that for almost 3 years. I was a nerd, so I would write to the Detroit Free Press, the news editor over the front page. His name was Michael McGregor, and he would write me back. And I was 13, 14 years old at the time, and he invited me to the Free Press to go on a tour of the newsroom, and I knew that was where I wanted to be and what I wanted to do. And they were starting a program for high schoolers, and I was one of the first to be a part of that program, which is still going on today. But I just knew that I wanted to be able to tell stories in some way, and journalism was a way to do that.
That's great. I have a follow-up question to that, but I definitely want to chime in on this one piece where, it's something about, I guess, teenager, right? Where I remember having one of my first handy recorders.
Ooh, yeah.
I was at City College in Baltimore. It's one of those, at least at the time, you leave your high school. And it's it was great until I left. So it's that, right? And while I was there, it's very, very tough school to kind of stay in, really high academics. And you wouldn't know if your friends would be there, sort of the next year. So I was going by with the handy recorder, just chiming in and having folks share their story, what that freshman year was like with this little handy recorder. Now, the problem with that time was I was very obnoxious. I would talk in the third person like the rock. Yeah, really setting the stage here. And I would get some of the weirdest response initially, and then I would just make it seem like it's an interview, really, asking these questions of, my fellow students, but it had to get past me speaking in the third person like a wrestler in 1999.
Wait, do you still have some of those recordings?
I plead the fifth on those. I'm going
You
to keep pushing
gotta.
it. And I have them
Somebody,
somewhere.
your mom, your family, y'all gotta dig those up somewhere. Yeah.
It's probably next to the rap songs I did also in high school. Again, different things, different times. We won't talk about it. There was a Macbeth rap song that I did.
Oh, now I need to. I need to find those tapes. We gotta find those.
So going back, with that sort of the initial like, storytelling, initial like writing, what was the first story that comes to mind for you? What was that experience like? Could you take us back a bit?
Yeah. So I was 15 years old, and Clarence Thomas was being confirmed. And at this point, the Detroit Free Press, I was an apprentice, but they had started this experiment of with Wayne State University, where they started a paper called Motown Teen. And once a month, Motown Teen would be published. And I was given the assignment of doing a story on Clarence Thomas being confirmed. So I went to the University of Michigan to talk with a law professor. And I prepared myself with an instructor on how to have this interview. I walked in that woman's office, and I think my first question was like, Rob, I just want to set this up for you that I was a 15-year-old Black girl. And so,
Sure.
like, my worldview was just expanding. But I think I asked her something to the effect of, how can you be, because I knew she was also a Republican, like, how could you be a Black person and be a Republican and also be in support of, like, this nominee?
Yeah.
And she really schooled me. She said, that's a biased question. And obviously, you're ignorant. You don't know your history around Black people and the Republican Party.
Yeah.
And she was right. I didn't. And it was a biased question. But I left there in tears, and I did not have the interview. And I had to go back to the newsroom at the Detroit Free Press and talk with my instructor and tell them, like, I don't have the goods. And I was able to write the story without those quotes. And I got some other quotes, but it was a lesson for me. It was like my first lesson on like what not to do.
Right. Oh wow. That's I think even now at 39, I would cry. I was like, oh no, I botched it. I didn't get it right. Or, like I've had the opportunity, especially in the last year, to talk to folks who are like professionals in journalism and storytelling, and really picking their brain, because I want to improve at what I do and doing this. And, 800 plus episodes and for this podcast, and 16 years though, as 16 years as a podcaster, it's just like you always want to learn. And especially now being an educator and teaching the next generation of young podcasters how to do their thing, I'm like, that's a bad question, or maybe you should think about that differently. I start thinking about it through that, but that's through sort of repetition and being able to have insightful conversations with folks such as yourself.
Yeah, and I mean, it comes with experience and reps, like interacting with people, having conversations with people, learning about human behavior and understanding those things that are beyond like the journalistic principles of what's biased, what's not. It's really about establishing relationships with people. And I was just learning that. I walked in that woman's office, with these questions. It was trial by fire in a great way, but it didn't turn me off. It actually invigorated me. And I learned from it.
It's great. And, one other thing before I move into this next question is, I try to get that feedback from folks, and, being very much an independent here. And I talk with my partner, and I just like, I'm going to listen to you, listen to Black women. And,
Right.
oh, I mean, it's got me this far. And she would tell me like really directly, it's like, just be neutral. Your job is to be neutral. And, you're kind of guiding maybe a conversation, but you don't want to insert yourself too much into it. And especially as I observe sort of what happens now, and this is actually a conversation I had earlier today about a another sort of podcaster and their way, or actually radio host, and their way of interviewing folks, to use the wrestling term, they're trying to get themselves over versus the conversation. Hey, I'm
Mm.
so smart, I'm so interested, or this is such a hot take. And that's fine, but that's not what I do. And I try, even when I'm doing the education thing, why does it matter to you? What do you care about in it? And that should guide the direction of maybe who you interview and, in that context, or even how you approach an interview.
Yes. And I'm glad you brought this up because for the majority of my career, I've been a reporter, correspondent. I've been out in the field interviewing people and then putting it together in a story. So packaging it up in a story, whether it's for television or for the radio or for writing, for print. But as a host, one of the things that I do in my work as a host is when I'm preparing to talk to somebody, I first have to get over myself. Like I talk to myself about like, why do I want to talk to this person? Why do I find them interesting? What are the things that are like personal to me, and work through those so that I can get over that, so that when I get into my conversation with that person, my own self-interest and selfishness is not at the forefront of this conversation, And I can give you an example of just interviewing like my favorite folks. I interviewed Pharrell not too long ago. And, of course, like I immediately want to tell him, so many of your songs are the soundtrack of my life, like I want to take you back to this one time when like this thing, or, just like you, when I was a kid, felt othered, like all of these things, that's the fan in me. But that's the thing I have to get over, because I have to realize that my role is to illuminate his humanity and his story. And so anything that has to do with our commonalities should be for that sole purpose, so that like my listeners can learn something new about him.
Yeah.
So, but it's something you have to work at, right? Because the inclination is to, as human beings, want to relate to people.
See, like I was saying before we got started, when I let the guests cook, you're over there cooking, you've answered two more questions. So shout out to you, making my job easy. I can turn my mic off. So, and thank you for that, because that's a really big point, big distinction there. Like when I go through and I'm doing an interview, the sort of drive is knowledge and curiosity. But to your point, it's like trying to turn off, sort of my fanboyism, or even to a degree, maybe my nerves. And even when I'm looking at someone, I'm like, there's the potential of interviewing someone I'm a big fan of. I might sit there and kind of like write questions just in case. You never know when that call comes. And then I go through the questions over and over. Some people may do the chat GPT of filtering it. Nah, I'm going through personally to see like, all right, let me take a little bit of this out of there. How do I get that person talking a bit more and opening up and sharing a bit more to really get comfortable and really, as you touched on, sort of illuminate their humanity?
Yes, yes.
So your career, let's talk a bit about that. Your career has grown steadily. Like again, I'm like looking at the track. I was like, how many? Really? That as well? And gathering stories from communities big and small throughout the country. That's one of the things that, again, aspirational. Could you share like maybe an early experience that, still motivates you in that vein of your, kind of being out there in the field? And that's different from like, I'm based in Baltimore. Most of my interviews are here, but a transformative period for me is really, because as an independent, really reaching out to some folks in Texas I saw that were interested in my work, and that they had a story that was there. And I was like, all right, I'm going to go to Texas. We're going to do it. And I look back at that on other instances where I leave Baltimore, the sort of comfort zone, and go to these other places, just bringing this brand of storytelling with me. But I always look back at Austin, Texas. What is that example for you, like earlier in your career, or even more recent within your career, of just kind of going out there that still motivates you?
Yeah. Well, I'll say that from a very young age, I always said if I weren't a journalist, I would be a researcher of some sort, because I just love digging for information. I love learning and In many ways, it's a selfish endeavor because it's something I just love to do for self-satisfaction to know. I used to, back in the day, so to show you how old I am, before the internet, and I would go to the main library and just research, just dig, read all the periodicals, go through like different books and things like that and subjects. And that was very fulfilling for me. And when the internet became a thing, like, in fact, it was great that it wasn't part of my childhood because I probably would have got swept up online. Honestly, I would have been just like in my room, holed up on the internet all the time because, it's a never ending well of information. But early in my career, I still look back so fondly and I feel giddy at those first experiences of being able to go out in the field and interview people for a story and then put a story together based on what I collected. Like it's such an exhilarating experience, and it never goes every day the way you expect it to go because that's how human beings are.
Sure.
But when you live in a community, I love local news. In my early career, I was a local news reporter for television stations, and just understanding your community, seeing things in your community, and like following up on those things and finding out there are stories behind the things that you notice, and then being able to illuminate it by telling those stories to the public. It's like a drug because you realize you have the power to inform people, to change the hearts and minds of people, or have them reflect or self-reflect on themselves. And storytelling allows people to see themselves. That's all it is. Whether it is a story that is completely different from yours, in that way you're able to self-reflect,
Sure.
or if it's just like yours or very similar, it gives you the ability to have a deeper understanding of yourself. And so those early days were really great because I was learning the craft. And with every experience, I would get better and better.
Again, it's the reps as you touched on, and
Exactly. Yep.
I try to. This is a weird aside before I move into this next question. I try to add a different experience to sort of podcasting. So I think it rewires certain things where kind of get into autopilot. It's like, oh, I know how to do this. Hit record, ask the questions, make sure you've emailed the person, all of that stuff. And I find that, it's not all the time, but maybe once a quarter, I'll do something that's really different. And here in Baltimore, I was working with a arts and music festival in helping with some of the, I guess, the storytelling, the retroactive of producing the event with different producers in the city. So basically, it's here's some money, put on a show. Basically, that's sort of what the setup is, and really empowering the local creatives. So I was asked to do an interview. I don't know how to swim. Just I'm going to pin that right there. Right. I was asked to do an interview in a boat. It was a small
Mm.
boat. And we were just going to roll around the inner harbor of Baltimore. It was four of us on this boat. And it was, a little water creeping in there. And I was like, oh. And then the really big boats are coming next to us, and then the speed boats. And I was like, oh, so this is where I die. Got it. And I was like, oh, there's the black box. I was like, I can read the headline now. Local C-list celebrity podcaster drowns inner harbor. And I asked the other folks on the person I was interviewing and the photographer, I was like, can either of you swim? They're like, oh, no. I was like, oh, so we're all gone.
We're all.
But I'll say the experience of doing that, and I didn't buckle at all. And the person driving the boat was just like, I was enthralled. Like, you were crushing this. And I was just like, yes, my feet are wet, So, but
Right.
it was an invigorating experience. So any of those podcasts following that, they were special, they were important. But that one is sort of one of those milestones and one of those sort of like, all right, here's a stretch rep. I need to go a little heavy on this weight.
Did you have on a life jacket?
I'm going to plead the fifth on that one as well. I did. I was safe.
I
Yes.
was about to say, like, whoa. I have done it too. I have a confession to make. I have been on boats, many boats in my career, for stories, and I don't know how to swim either, Rob. It's actually in my 2025 list of resolutions that I'm going to overcome this and learn how to swim. What about you?
I may be there with you. I think I'm going to learn how to ride a bike first. I'm a land guy. See, Aquarius is right. We're water barrier, but we're not in the water. Yeah, yeah.
So you don't know how to ride a bike either.
I
Did you
don't.
have a bike as a child?
We used to skateboard actually. That was sort of what our thing was. Yeah,
Oh, well, if you can skateboard, you can get on a bike. That'll be no problem for you.
debatable. I'm very tall and my limbs are all over the place.
Wait, how tall are you?
6'4".
Oh, you are tall. Is your family tall?
No, my dad's 5'9". My mom's 5'3". It's just
Wow.
like, who's
Where
this
did you
muscle?
come from? Somebody in your family. It has to go even back further generations, maybe.
Yeah, probably. I think I had a few uncles that were in the 6'5" sort of range.
Yeah.
What sticks out, yeah. Because even my brother is short as well. He's like also 5'9". It's like he and I look exactly the same, but he's like a lot shorter than me.
Yeah, you're taller. That's awesome.
So let's, if you will, I want to move into NPR a little bit. So reading, sort of your coverage on just major events, highlighting the intersection of politics, race, culture. It's a certain amount of care, obviously, that goes with some of the topics, and and I love that. I love that that's something that's being addressed and being covered, and that's like in your wheelhouse again, the reps. And I find like, news right now, like has this sort of, it's a rush to get it out there. It's like getting it out there quick versus getting it right. And I see this a lot of times, even with something as simple as, let's say, ESPN. I love Rocky Four, right? And when Carl Weathers passed away, I'm looking at the article on ESPN and I was like, there are factual things that are wrong in here.
Mm.
And I'm not like scanning for that, but because I love that movie, I'm like looking at those details and I was like, well, you got to get this thing out there. It's like maybe another set of eyes or something along those lines. And that's something that's on this, not as important, but it is a story that was out there. For you and sort of your take and your insight, what are some of the considerations when there's like a story that's a big story, like got to get it out there, got to get out there as quickly as possible, but also you want to get it right, obviously. How do you go about that? What are your sort of like insights and your thoughts on sort of speed and accuracy, I suppose?
Well, I will first say it's really unfortunate when you find errors in subjects that you know about or just in news stories, period, because it further erodes the trust that the public has in media. And that's been going on for quite some time. Like it's not something new. I actually think that we are now at the almost like a free fall, a major devolvement in the public's trust of mainstream media in a way that is really alarming and scary. And if I had the answers, like I probably would just be, a millionaire at this point because I could help solve it. But I will say, one of the reasons why I feel honored to work in public media is because there is that care around facts and the effort to get it right. We are human beings, so there are errors that happen all the time. But in this news cycle that's so fast with so many players who are disseminating news, you never have to go to a mainstream news organization, to their website or to their TV show or to, on the radio to get the information. You can find it in lots of other places. And with that, it becomes a challenge for a place like NPR who wants to also make certain that as well as getting it right, there are the eyes that are on it. The longer you wait, the less relevant you become in the discourse around that news event. But it is a priority of a place like NPR to get it right, but the pressures are even higher than ever at a time when across all media budget cuts have really decimated newsrooms in a way that, back when I was when I was young in high school, working for the Detroit Free Press, where there were 3 floors that made up the news division.
Yeah.
And today it's like half of 1 floor. There's that erosion also plays a part in the errors that you might see in and news articles. So your question to me was, what are the considerations I take with
Yeah,
my work?
sure.
And currently, as a host, I do so much research on the subjects that I'm going to interview. I interview for Fresh Air. I do 2 long-form interviews a week, and I'm talking with my guests for up to 2 hours. And so I have to know as much about them as possible. But there's something that I've learned in doing that is even with my resource material and my research, a lot of it is sometimes inaccurate. And in talking with the folks that I'm interviewing, I will learn it. They'll say, "Oh yeah, that was written about me, and that is not true." So, you know, and so I've learned just how prevalent it is because I have never experienced this in my career. I have made mistakes, but I have never made egregious errors in my journalism. And that's because I do abide by the journalistic principles of making certain that there is fact checking. There not just 2 sides to a story, but maybe there are 3 or 4. And I've been very fortunate to work for news organizations that give me that time to be able to do that within the barriers of the deadline, of course.
Sure.
But it's a challenge. I don't even know if I answered your question,
No,
Rob.
no, no. You
Such a
did.
challenge.
No, you did, and thank you for that because it's insight, and it's I think sort of the behind the curtain of what it looks like within the industry. I think that gives a lot of context on what's there. Like, um, it's a weird comparison, but I'll make it. I'm a snob about certain things, and this question might come up later in the rapid fire one. So even the great Tonya Mosley will get the rapid fire questions, but I really like chefs. I really like restaurants and all of that different stuff. And I find that at times when I go there, I'm very forgiving of, let's say there's an error, and rarely I send things back, right? But when there's those instances where I feel like I haven't been informed about like maybe something that's off the menu or maybe the preparation or how something is done is a lot different, I'm like, there was a communication lapse and this isn't the first. And that's where sort of I'm a little less forgiving. But on the basis of it, it's like I understand that things can change. You might have had crab that morning, Baltimore. You might have had crab that morning, and now you don't have crab or the quality of a particular ingredient. It's not quite there. But if I'm making that order, for instance, it's up to the hostess, it's up to someone to inform me so I can have a better, informed decision versus thinking I'm gonna get some delicious crab and it's just like, what is this?
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of that I want to know going in. And the other thing I think in covering some of the folks that I cover and over the last, let's say 5 years, this sort of concept of like news literacy, just kind of being able to social media is weird. And a lot of people use it as their prime news source. And I think it should be a bit more diverse. You get a sense of what are the different angles, the different sides, the 3 or 4 other sides versus the initial two. And I find like, you know, being out there, not everyone is able to do it. And you have certain things presented as truth.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of limited. It's just like, and even with sort of social media, I remember spending time, probably a little further back, but spending time on like Facebook. And I just remember my feed was very specific. And I was like, oh, right. So now instead of getting a news feed, I'm getting this sort of curated thing that's kind of informing the perception.
Yep. Yeah. It's an echo chamber because the algorithm is now feeding you more things that you have engaged with, that are like the things that you have engaged with. And before you know it, like you're getting a singular point of view or very similar points of view. And that has been a challenge in our country really for the last decade. And it is one that I think can't really be fixed until there's regulation around tech companies and the digital space. And right now, there's no incentive to do that. And so, really, it comes down to us as individuals really trying to be vigilant to make sure we don't fall prey to misinformation and educating those around us. I didn't even realize my daughter is 17 and she's very well informed, but a lot of the news she gets is from TikTok. She knows like details about what's happening, but she knows just a little bit, and then she knows what, the TikTokers she follows have to say about it, what their opinions are about it. And in many ways it's aggregated. Sometimes people are just relaying the headlines back. But it's a dangerous place to be because, that's also where misinformation can flourish at the same time.
Yes, and I have some takes on that I will share with you off mic. I think in recent events of where we're recording, post election, I feel like the social media had a little and podcast had a little bit to do with some of that.
There are big podcasts that have large audiences,
Hmm.
and their platform disseminates misinformation or skewed information or falls into conspiracy theories, and it fuels your worldview in a way that will have you believing things that aren't true.
Yeah, we got it right there, actually. I love that. We didn't have to do the thing afterwards. It's just right there,
But
100%.
it's scary. It's really scary though, because what you realize is that like we all, and I will preface this to say that like I think that we all live in our own realities, but you realize when there's no common ground on truth, in fact, it's hard to understand where there can be common ground. Like, I feel like that's the floor. If we both agree that you have on a purple sweater, then we can go from there. But if I see purple and you're like, no, this is brown,
Yeah.
I mean, where are we going to go?
I think when, and you're right, I think when we got to a point or where the point of not calling things lies or misinformation or alternative facts, it's like let's not do that. Let's just use actual terminology. Let's not make up terminology. I don't believe in alternative facts. It's just like either this is this, purple, or it's not, you don't see it as purple, but don't call it something else because then we're just playing a weird game where we're just in disagreement and it's baked in, which fuels the algorithms.
Okay, Rob, I have to know now, though. Were you against the use of that language from jump, or did you feel, initially not calling a lie came from this idea that we don't know the motivation of the person who is saying the thing or the untruth that then turns out to be a lie? Like a lie is almost like a moral indictment. Like it's saying you are saying something untrue on purpose.
I think I was early on it because I'm a stickler at times for terminology. It's just like, what is the term? What is this? Like, again, going back to food, I know it doesn't relate, but I'm a purist when it comes to certain things. If you put shrimp and grits in front of me, don't say it's an interpretation. It's like these are culinary lies. I'm
Mhm.
that way about food. So when it comes to sort of facts, especially here, one of the motivations in starting this podcast, I felt like people didn't have a real understanding or full representation of the story of what Baltimore is and what the people in Baltimore do and what they're about. So I felt like my intent was to help illuminate folks and get past some of the news stuff that I'm like, this is not what I'm experiencing. I'm here currently.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's just my take on it.
Yep, yep, yep.
So I got a few more real questions. I call them real questions because the rapid fire questions, they're silly. I want to go to, you touched on fresh air a moment ago. So could you please share what that experience was like? Because I mean, fresh air, is what, since 75? Like that is like a part of the conversation and arts and issues. So if you will, could you share the experience for yourself?
Yeah. Well, I didn't grow up listening to NPR, but my mother did listen to radio, to news talk radio. And so I grew up like being in the back seat of the car, hearing the news that way. But as I got older, really, when I started my journalism career and I'd be in the news van as a television reporter, we would have on NPR and I would hear Fresh Air with Terry Gross. And it was my favorite program along with This American Life. I just thought these two shows really give me a slice of like Americana in a way that felt fresh and new and like slowed down and intimate because, what we do, this auditory medium is so intimate because you're connecting to a voice. And so I loved it. I loved what Terry did, and I always thought it would be a dream job to work there. And I moved on and went about my career. I never thought it would be something that would become true for
Yeah.
me. I joined public media in 2016, and I started off as an education reporter. And then I was filling in as a host for a show called Radio Boston in Boston, Massachusetts. And then I went to San Francisco and I was a Silicon Valley bureau chief there. And I started hosting their hour long, I would fill in their hour long show that was similar to Fresh Air, where I'd be interviewing guests. And I really loved it. I liked the art of conversation. And that show was live. So that really, like, it was trial by fire. You know, sometimes do you ever, Rob, like, look at what you've done and realize, like, if it had gone the other way, you probably would you'd be in a whole different, like, if I had started off being able to record interviews,
Yeah.
I probably could never do a live interview for an hour. I would feel so tripped up by it. But because I didn't know anything, I went into it not knowing anything about this. I did it and I learned on the spot. And then I started hosting the news program Here and Now, which is a co-production with NPR and WBUR in Boston. And I did that during the pandemic,
Yeah.
during January 6th insurrection, the Trump years. That was quite a time. It showed me what I was made of because we were doing live radio constantly. There was news updates and breaking news constantly. And really, to go back to your question about fact checking in real time, it takes a lot of hard work and it takes a lot of careful consideration when you are disseminating things out to the public, especially of great consequence, even if it's not of great consequence, but, you know, especially during that time. So that was a stressful time, but I feel really proud of the work that we did. And I started filling in, like doing special interviews for Fresh Air. I met a producer there who invited me to do that. And I did that for about 2 years, where every few months I would do an interview for Fresh Air. And when they had an opening, Terry Gross, the host in 75, wanted to have a more permanent fixture on the show to give her a break to split up the interviews. She's been hosting the show for 50 years. I can't even imagine 5 days a week, 2 hour interviews every day. That is that's a workload that me right now, I don't know if I could handle it. And she did it for so long. She's
Right.
like a superhero. And so that's how it happened.
Wow. That's again, going to the numbers, like I'm over here patting myself on the back with 800 interviews. I'm like, oof.
No, that is exceptional. 800 interviews?
Yeah, it's cool, but I think about it in terms of like a radio person, and so hearing those numbers, like 50 years, like multiple hours a day, interviews every day, essentially. Ooh, that's
But you see, like we can only like we can count the people who do that on one hand, you know. I
right.
think there was like Tom Joyner back in the day, and like those people were machines. You should be very proud of yourself.
Well, thank you. You're right. And thank you for that. So I got two more questions I want to dive in on real quick. This one is sort of more around like editing, or sort of like just when you get notes, right? Like, as a podcaster, I'm an independent, so I do I'm doing a funding dance sometimes. That's what I like to call it. It's like a rain dance, but it's just kind of like grants and applications.
Yeah.
And, I find like I'm driven by sort of what my vision is. Like, this is one of the reasons why you and I are talking. I'm so, grateful that you said yes. And if other folks from a maybe certain funder's perspective were like, oh, well, why would you want to talk to this person? Or you should talk to these, or you're a Black podcaster, so you only should talk to these types of people. And I'm like, nah, I got to follow sort of my vision and what feels true to me, what I'm curious about. But those notes are there. And when money's involved or when opportunities are involved, it can get really muddy. How do you
Mhm.
stay true to your vision and your voice within your work? Because also you're a podcaster as well as a host. So, could you share some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I feel really lucky. 25 years into a career where I have the autonomy to be able to choose who I want to interview now. And as far as my journalism and my podcasting, those are my podcasts. And so my podcasts are funded through foundations and grants too. And the foundations that I get money from, I set out my vision very clearly to them. And there is a clear separation. So they don't really have any say on the content per se. And so I make sure that right from the start they know where I'm going with it, so that I don't have any problems in that regard. But I do know that feeling early on in my career where there are priorities of a news organization that I work for, and I'm going to do stories or interview people based on what those priorities are. But even within that, I can bring myself to that. And that's why those reps were so important. I needed to do those things in order to understand my vision. Sometimes that's really important. And I don't think I say this because I work and I mentor a lot of younger people who want to, from the moment they graduate college or however old they are, they want to be in where I'm sitting. And I think that, but see, the thing about you, Rob, is that you've done the reps already. Like, you're doing the reps. You are learning, and you have now come to a clear vision of who you are. But it took me some time of exploring and doing different types of stories and talking to different people and learning about things that maybe like my own curiosity wouldn't lead me to really understand where my curiosity lies, if that makes sense, to understand where my point of view comes from, what makes Tonya Tonya, what makes a Tonya interview Tonya, what makes me interested in people. And so I always tell younger people, don't skip over that. It might feel like it's not grunt work, but it just feels like it's not aligned with maybe what you ultimately want to do to have full power and scope on your vision. But that type of experience is important.
For a second, I thought you were going to do a third person thing, like, who does Tanya want to talk to? I was like, wow, you're echoing my former podcasting from high school. Wow, this is great. And thank you for that. That's really good, and I think it is a good way to. It's a backhanded, it's not backhand, it's a haphazard sort of transition into sort of the final question here, the closeout. And you were kind of touching on it a little bit there. What would be a piece of advice you would share with a podcaster, with a journalist, with storytellers that, that's helped you, I guess, sort of paying it forward, like a piece of advice that you've gotten that you would impart to the listeners?
That's a really good question. You know, when I remember I started off as a producer in television before I became a reporter, and I wanted to be a reporter so bad. Like, back when I, back when I was doing that, like, we would send out resume tapes, VHS tapes, to get jobs.
Yeah.
This was such a long time ago. It's like the 90s. And, I had a mentor, Sean Gables. She was a television news anchor in Detroit, and she was great. She was like all the things I wanted to be, and I would always call on her for advice. And she would say to me the thing that I am saying, the reps thing. She was like, you just need more experience, Tonya. You have to be out there. You do have talent, but it's not going to happen overnight for you. And what are you doing this for? You're doing this, it's a journey. It's not a sprint. It is not, I wouldn't trade any of my experience because it's what led me to today, and it allows me to command a seat. I don't know if I would have been able to command the seat without the experiences that I had. And so I think being patient and understanding, but also not letting, I meet a lot of young people that feel discouraged, and they say, well, like, what is the secret to not being discouraged? And I found that, like, leaning into the work is what helped me, not leaning into the particular job I want or the status that I want to be in, but the literal work, being able to sit down and talk to someone about their story, researching a story, going out and uncovering facts and information and things that people didn't know. That is what carries you through, and allows you to really ultimately command the seat that you want to as a storyteller.
That's great. It's like a mic drop piece there. And it's so true. Like, when I have those instances where I get a little discouraged, or it's like, hey, I got a lot to do right here. And I find when I'm looking at sort of Yeah, at one point in this journey, I did like, I think 6 interviews in one day. And it was another instance. These are not the same time. And in another week, I had like 18 interviews and, have a day job, have all of the other stuff. Right. And, I used to just look at like, all right, Friday, today is the day to write questions. Today is the day to, finish out sort of your research. And at times, after week of doing it, it would feel like, wow, this is a lot. And I have almost a chore part of it to do. But
Mm.
doing this part, that makes that worthwhile, sort of the research, being able to have the interview, have the questions, and get to know a person, and then have the person kind of like share their story with you and the pieces that they're down to share. That's the part that is so great, but it's sort of the work that has to go into that. And now that process is so much easier than it used to be because I know what I'm looking to do. I know who I am as a creative. I know what a Rob story is. I know what a Rob interview is. I know what Rob likes to do. I'm doing my third person there.
I see. I see. I understand. What is your motivation? What do you like? What do you like about what you do?
See, now you're interviewing me. I like the opportunity to connect with someone and to find that sort of commonality that is going to sound like, talking back to yourself, but sort of that humanity in a person. And that's why I structured the questions the way that I do. Like there's a curiosity there that I want to satisfy. And selfishly, I like to talk to interesting people, and make myself seem a little bit more interesting. So I'll reference you. It's like, yeah, I was talking to Tonya Mosley, right? And she said that it'll make me seem like I'm interesting, but it's really just me echoing something that you said. But yeah, it's curiosity is the main thing.
And that is, I mean, that is when I was young. I just also want to tell you this before we depart that I didn't realize it till a few years ago. But one of my driving forces is also to paint a a fuller picture of who we are as Black people. When I grew up in Detroit, local television news was king. That's how we learned about ourselves and our communities. And within local television news, crime ruled it. If it bleeds, it leads. And there was so much crime and violence. And it was not a multi-dimensional look at who we were. And yet, in my communities and my family and my neighborhood and my friends and life in general, I was seeing a different picture. And as I grew up and started to experience the world as a Black woman, I realized that the detriment of those images and that type of storytelling had on communities, not only our communities, but communities outside of ours that are looking at this and they don't know, they don't have a fuller picture of our humanity. So that has also been a driving force for me is to give a fuller picture of who we are, of who everyone is, but really with an emphasis on who we are.
It's it's here. It's the same thing here as well. If I'm being 100% honest with it, it's sort of the timing, the Elijah Cummings and Trump back in 2019. And I just remember some of the folks that I was interviewing. I started the podcast, but we weren't kind of up and rolling. We may have been 6 episodes in, and I was like, "How dare you?" Sort of my thinking. And I was like, "You're not talking about the streets. You're not talking about the sidewalks, the buildings. You're talking about the people." And I refuse. So I said, the best way to disprove sort of this position is to have real interviews with the people from this quote unquote rat infested city.
Mm.
And that was sort of the thinking that was there. And that was, there's a creative mornings talk out there where I lead off with that. Like that's the beginning of this whole thing and sort of what keeps igniting it. And, where we're at with that situation kind of coming back around, it gives me more of zeal and the gusto to kind of keep doing that and showing sort of the commonality or the love I have for this city and the people in it in these other places and showing that connection, whether it be a Detroit, whether it be Philly, New Orleans, so on. These are places I'm gonna be going back to. But yeah, that's what it is. I was going for the bit, but I was like, let me be honest here. I gotta have the honesty here.
Well,
Okay.
thank you for what you do. It's tremendous, and you're really good. So this was awesome. I had such a pleasure. Do you see yourself as an artist?
I struggle with it. I'm somewhere in the middle. I think anthropology is close to what it is. I think there's an artistic bent to it, but not an artist. I guess that's the best way I can put it. Might be a curator, in some ways, but not necessarily an artist.
Yeah.
Um, but I got to ask you the rapid fire questions. We can't just
Oh,
wrap.
okay. I thought I had, okay, here we go. Here we go.
And thank you. So these are real quick. I got three of them for you. Number one. Oh, let me give you the context. So it's kind of like, look, whatever the answer is, like I said what I said. Don't overthink it, because people are like, well, do I really like vanilla ice cream? Maybe a strawberry. So here's the first one. How do you take your coffee?
Oh, cream and sweet and low. Yeah, I might have cancer later on, but I have to have three sweet and low, and I have to have the carnation creamer. It's like that. Yeah.
See, I like when people get real specific. Like you can know that that's a consideration right there. It's got to be this specific thing.
So much so, I carry sweet and low in my bag. So when I'm traveling, because, not every place has it.
It's true. I'm just black coffee. Just the Rob Lee, little cinnamon in there as well. I do that. Antioxidants. Yeah. Now, I referenced this earlier in the pod. What are you snobbish about? Nothing really crazy or what have you. Like I was saying, I'm a little snobbish about food. I'm very particular. Like, don't give me shrimp and grits. And you're like, there's no pork in this. I'm like, what are you doing?
I am very snobbish around food as well.
You get it?
I'm also snobbish around like home and hearth. So anything that has to do with my home. I do, my mother used to call me a poor little rich girl because she said, I always really liked nice things, but we were poor. What's wrong with you, Tonya? But mostly it's not that I like nice things to be showy. I like to feel comfortable in my home. Your home is where you spend the most of your time. You want it to feel like a place you want to be. And so I take a lot of pride in making my home feel comfortable for me. And so I'm sort of snobbish about that. And eating good food. Like I want to make sure that we have good ingredients, that we're cooking. This is very important for my family.
It's great. It's super important. Here's the last one. It's a self-serving, but it just is a full circle moment. What is your Detroiter greeting?
Oh, so see, I don't say what up though. No,
You said it. I got you to say it.
even though people do to me though, but I don't have one, but I know that one. I'm just like, hello, hey, how you doing? I'm trying to watch, we'll get off and I'll be like, oh yeah, that's what we say. But yeah, I know what up though. That's iconic Detroit. It's so cold in the D. We say that to be funny, in the winter time. Because do you know that video and song, It's So Cold in the D?
No.
Oh my gosh, I'm gonna send it to you.
Okay. I would love that. I just say howdy to people. It just feels like I'm not from here, and even though I'm here.
Howdy?
Yeah, because some people, it's an age thing. I'm 39, and some of the younger folks, they'll say, yeah, what's up, dummy? I'm like, I don't know what that means.
Oh.
But it's sort of a term of endearment. I was like, I don't use that, player. I don't know what that is.
Wow, that sounds like an insult, okay?
Lightweight. They're trying to fade. So that's kind of it. So there's two things I want to do as we close out here. One, I want to thank you so very much for coming on to this podcast. This was a treat. This was a pleasure. And two, I want to invite and encourage you. Anything you want to say in these final moments, social media, website, always offer the shameless plug out there. But if you will, please, the floor is yours.
Well, Rob, I really appreciate this conversation. You're so good at what you do, and you're so warm. And I love being able to talk about the craft of storytelling and journalism and just the art of podcasting, too. And you just showed your talent right here. And you can follow me at Tonya Talks on Instagram. That's Tonya, and then Talks, because I'm constantly talking. I'm also on Threads, and I'm no longer on Twitter. So, those are my two.
Yeah.
And you can also listen to me anytime on NPR's Fresh Air. You can also find my two podcasts, She Has a Name and Truth Be Told, wherever you listen to podcasts.
And there you have it, folks. I want to again thank Tonya Mosley for coming on to the podcast. And for Tonya Mosley, I'm Rob Lee, saying that there's art, culture, and community in and around your neck of the woods. You've just got to look for it.